Part 6 opens up with Chapter 20, Midas and Others. And you have a guy sitting on a chair that leans back, but he sits up straight. He reaches out his right hand for a fruit with like twigs. Usually we think of apples, but they kind of make it shaped like a lemon, but they don't really give any detail to it. There's other fruit in a bowl on a table, a cup or pitcher, and some other food on a plate. But coming off this table is the shininess. The story of Midas is told best by Ovid, from whom I have taken it. Pindar is my authority for Aesculapius, whose life he tells in full. These Danaids are the subject of one of the plays of Aesculapius. Glaucus and Scylla, Pomona and Vertumnus, Erysichthon, all come from Ovid. So, less important myths. Well, sometimes those are the most important myths, right? Midas, whose name has become a synonym for a rich man, had very little profit from his riches. The experience of possessing them lasted for less than a day, and it threatened him with speedy death. He was an example of folly, being as fatal as sin, for he meant no harm. He merely did not use any intelligence. His story suggests that he had none to use. He was king of Phrygia, the land of roses, and he had great rose gardens near his palace. Into them once strayed old Silenus, who, intoxicated as always, had wandered off from Bacchus's train, where he belonged, and lost his way. The fat old drunkard was found asleep in a bower of roses by some servants of the palace. They bound him with rosy garlands, set a flowering wreath on his head, and woke him up, and bore him in this ridiculous guise to Midas as a great joke. Midas welcomed him and entertained him for 10 days. Then he led him to Bacchus, who, delighted to get him back, told Midas whatever wish he made would come true. Without giving a thought to the inevitable result, Midas wished that whatever he touched would turn into gold. Of course, Bacchus, granting the favor, foresaw what would happen at the next meal. But Midas saw nothing until the foot he lifted, the food he lifted to his lips became a lump of metal. Dismayed and very hungry and thirsty, he was forced to hurry off to the entity and implore him to take his favor back. Bacchus told him to go wash in the source of the river Pactolus, and he would lose the fatal gift. He did so, and that was said to be the reason why gold was found in the sands of the river. Later on, Apollo changed Midas's ears into those of a donkey, but again, the punishment was for stupidity, not for any wrongdoing. He was chosen as one of the umpires in the musical contest between Apollo and Pan. The rustic entity could play very pleasing tunes on his pipes of reeds. Can't help, maybe this is where the whole Ezekiel passage comes from, right? But when Apollo struck his silver lyre, there was no sound on earth or in heaven that could equal the melody, except only the choir of the Muses. Nevertheless, although the umpire, the mountain entity, Timaeus, gave the palm to Apollo, Midas, no more intelligent musically than in any other way, honestly preferred Pan, of course. This was double stupidity on his part. Ordinary prudence would have reminded him that it was dangerous to side against Apollo with Pan. Infinitely less powerful, and so he got his donkey's ears. Apollo said that he was merely giving to ears so dull and dense the proper shape. Midas hid them under a cap especially made for the purpose, but the servant who cut his hair was obliged to see them. He swore a solemn oath never to tell, but the secrecy so weighed upon the man that he finally went and dug a hole in a field and spoke softly into it, "King Midas has donkey's ears." Then he felt relieved and filled the hole up. But in the spring reeds grew up there, and when stirred by the wind, they whispered those buried words and revealed to men not only the truth, what had happened to the poor, stupid king, but also that when the entities are contestants, the only safe course is to side with the strongest. I don't know about might equals right, but Aesculapius. There was a maiden in Thessaly named Coronis, a beauty so surpassing that Apollo loved her, but strangely enough, she did not care long for her supposedly divine lover. She preferred a mere mortal. You know, the jinn have respite, so they're going to be around a while, right? She did not reflect that Apollo, the entity of truth, who never deceived, could not himself be deceived. The Pythian lord of Delphi, he has a comrade he can trust, straightforward, never wandering astray. It is his mind which knows all things, which never touches falsehood, which no one or an entity or mortal can outwit. He sees whether the deed is done or only planned. Coronis was foolish indeed to hope that he would not learn of her faithlessness. It is said that the news was brought to him by his bird, the raven, then pure white, with beautiful snowy plumage, and that Apollo, in a fit of furious anger and with the complete injustice the entities usually showed when they were angry, punished the faithful messenger by turning his feathers black. Of course, Coronis was killed. Some say that the entity did it himself, others that he got Artemis to shoot one of her unerring arrows at him. In spite of his ruthlessness, he felt a pang of grief as he watched the maiden placed on the funeral pyre, and the wild flames roar up. "At least I will save my child," he said to himself, and just as Zeus had done when Scylla perished, he snatched away the babe, which was very near birth. He took it to Chiron, the wise and kindly old centaur, to bring up in his cave on Mount Pelion, and told him to call the child Aesculapius. Many nobles had given Chiron their sons to rear, but of all the peoples, the child of the dead Coronis, Coronis, not the cut, but I don't know what this looks like in Greek, but Coronis was dearest to him. He was not like the other lads, forever running about and bent on sport. He wanted most of all to learn whatever his foster father could teach him about the art of healing, and that was not a little. Chiron was learned in the use of herbs and gentle incantations and cooling potions, but his pupil surpassed him. He was able to give aid in all manner of maladies. Whoever came to him suffering, whether from wounded limbs or bodies wasting away with disease, even those who were sick unto death, he delivered from their torment. A gentle craftsman who drove pain away, soother of cruel pangs, a joy to men, bringing them golden health. He was a universal benefactor, and yet he was to draw down on himself the anger of the entities, and by the sin the entities never forgave. He thought thoughts too great for man. He was once given a large fee to raise one from the dead, and he did so. It is said by many that the man called back to life was Hippolytus, Theseus' son, who died so unjustly, and that he never again fell under the power of death, but lived in Italy, immortal forever, where he was called Erysichthon and worshipped as a god. However, the great physician who had delivered him from Hades had no such happy fate. Zeus would not allow a mortal to have power over the dead, and he struck Aesculapius with his thunderbolt and slew him. Apollo, in great anger at his son's death, went to Etna, where the Cyclops forged the thunderbolts and killed with his arrows, some say, the Cyclops themselves. Some say their sons. Zeus, greatly angered in his turn, condemned Apollo to serve King Admetus as a slave for a period which is differently given as 1 or 9 years. It was this Admetus whose wife, Alcestis, Hercules rescued from Hades. But Aesculapius, even though he had so displeased, who was thought to be king of the gods and men, was honored on earth as no other mortal. For hundreds of years after his death, the sick and the maimed and the blind came for healing to his temples. There they would pray and sacrifice, and after that he would go to sleep. Then, in their dreams, the good physician would reveal to them just how they could be cured. Snakes played some part in the cure. Just what is not known, but they were held to be the sacred servants of Aesculapius. It is certain that thousands upon thousands of sick people through the centuries believed that he had freed them from their pain and restored them to health. And there are properties of snake venom and stuff, being careful of things, of course, because some of it's just the right amount of poison deals with something, but it doesn't take out the person. That happens. Or whether it's by reaction or it itself doing something. Of course, it's not really something to play around with. Snake oil salesmen were usually was nothing snake in the snake oil, as they called it. The Danaids. These maidens are famous, far more so than anyone reading their story would expect. They are often referred to by the poets, and they are among the most prominent sufferers in the hell of mythology, where they must forever try to carry water in leaking jars, yet except for one of them, Hypermnestra, they did only what the Argonauts found the women of Lemnos had done. They killed their husbands. Nevertheless, the Lemnians are hardly ever mentioned, while everyone who knows even a little about mythology has heard of the Danaids. The Danaids. They were 50 of them. That's an interesting number because the whole Marduk thing and whatnot, but all of them, in Persian, all of them daughters of Danaus, one of Eo's descendants, who dwelt by the Nile. Their 50 cousins, sons of Danaus, brother Aegyptus, wanted to marry them, or Aegyptus, where the word Egypt comes from, which, for some unexplained reason, they were absolutely opposed to doing. They fled with their father by ship to Argos, where they found sanctuary. The Argives voted unanimously to maintain the right of the suppliant. When the sons of Aegyptus arrived, ready to fight against their brides, to gang their brides, the city repulsed them. They would allow no women to be forced to marry against her will. They told the newcomers, nor would they surrender any suppliant, no matter how feeble and no matter how powerful the pursuer. At this point, there's a break in the story when it is resumed in the next chapter, so to speak. The maidens are being married to their cousins, and their father is presiding at the marriage feast. There is no explanation of how this came about, but at once it is clear that it was not through any change of mind in either Danaids or his daughters, because at the feast he is represented as giving each girl a dagger. As the event shows, all of them had been told what to do and had agreed. After the marriage, in the dead of night, they killed their bridegrooms, everyone except Hypermnestra. She alone was moved by pity. She looked at the strong young man lying motionless in sleep beside her, and she could not strike with her dagger to change that glowing vigor into cold death. Her promise to her father and her sisters was forgotten. She was, the Latin poet Horace says, splendidly false. She woke the youth. His name was Glaucus, told him all, and helped him to flee. Her father threw her into prison for her treachery to him. One story says that she and Glaucus came together again and lived at last in happiness, and that their son was Abbas, the great-grandfather of Perseus. The other stories end with the fatal wedding night and her imprisonment. All of them, however, tell the unending futility of the task the 49 Danaids were compelled to pursue in the lower world as a punishment for the murdering their husbands. At the river's edge, they filled forever jars riddled with holes, so that the water poured away, and they must return to fill them again and again. See them drain dry. Now you can also put this at the star card for the tarot. And 49 is an interesting number. Because it relates to 7 times 7 myths of female demons in particular. And we have an illustration on the next page. Glaucus and Scylla. And all you see is his upper torso, and he's reaching up. Is he stuck in the rock or something? I don't know. And this woman with her legs kind of crossed a little bit, and she's like, I guess keeping her clothes from completely flying away in the wind there. And the other hand, yeah, she's keeping her clothes on in the wind. And huge mountain crag. There's like a sea beast, the tail of a sea beast. So, Glaucus and Scylla. Glaucus was a fisherman who was fishing one day from a green meadow which sloped down to the sea. He had spread his catch out on the grass and was counting the fish when he saw them all begin to stir, and then, moving toward the water, slipped into it and swam away. He was utterly amazed. Had an entity done this, or was there some strange power in the grass? He picked a handful and ate it. At once, an irresistible longing for the sea took possession of him. There was no denying it. He ran and leaped into the waves. The sea entities received him kindly and called on ocean to Tethys to purge his mortal nature away and make him one of them. 100 rivers were summoned to pour the waters upon him. He lost consciousness in the rushing flood. When he recovered, he was a sea entity with hair green like the sea, and a body ending with a fish's tail. To the dwellers in the water, a fine and familiar form, but strangely irrepellent to the dwellers on earth. So he seemed to the lovely nymph Scylla, when she was bathing in a little bay and caught sight of him rising from the sea. She fled from him until she stood on a lofty promontory where she could safely watch him, wondering at the half-man, half-fish. Glaucus called up to her, "Maiden, I am no monster. I am but an entity with power over the waters, and I love you." But Scylla turned from him and hastened inland, was lost to sight. Okay, in the drawing, you kind of miss that. Oh, it's probably in the shadow. The sea creature body slithering off into the water. Glaucus was in despair, for he was madly in love. Well, seeing somebody lusting after him is not quite the same thing as being in love, thank you very much. And he determined to go to Circe, the enchantress, and beg her for a love potion to melt Scylla's hard heart. But as he told her his tale of love and implored her help, Circe fell in love with him. She wooed him with her sweetest words and looks, but Glaucus would have none of her. Trees will cover the sea bottom, and seaweed the mountain tops before I cease to love Scylla, he told her. Circe was furiously angry, but with Scylla, not Glaucus. She prepared a vial of very powerful poison, and going to the bay where Scylla bathed, she poured into it the baleful liquid. As soon as Scylla entered the water, she was changed into a frightful monster. Out from her body grew serpents and fierce dogs' heads. The beastly forms were part of her. She could not fly from them or push them away. She stood there rooted to a rock in her unutterable misery, hating and destroying everything that came within her reach, a peril to all sailors who passed near her, as Jason and Odysseus and Aeneas found out. And well, I guess she's a fitting mate for Glaucus now, in some ways, but what do the dog heads and the serpent's parts mean? Erysichthon. One woman had power given her to assume different shapes, power as great as Prometheus had. She used it, strangely enough, to procure food for her starving father. Her story is the only one in which the good entity Ceres appears cruel and vindictive. Erysichthon had the wicked audacity to cut down the tallest oak in a grove sacred to Ceres. His servants shrank from the sacrilege when he ordered them to fell it, whereupon he seized an axe himself and attacked the mighty trunk around which the Danaids used to hold their dances. Blood flowed from the tree when he struck it. Dragon's blood is a nice incense. I think there's a couple trees that have this red resin that when it's heated it looks like flowing blood, or when it's naturally flowing. And a voice came from within warning him that Ceres would surely punish his crime, but these marvels did not check his fury. He struck again and again until the great oak crashed to the ground. The Dryads hastened to Ceres to tell her what had happened, and the female entity, deeply offended, told them she would punish the criminal in a way never known before. She sent one of them in her car to the bleak region where famine dwells to order her to take possession of Erysichthon. Bid her see to it, Ceres said, that no abundance shall ever satisfy him. He shall starve in the very act of devouring food. Famine obeyed the command. She entered Erysichthon's room where he slept, and she wrapped her skinny arms around him. Holding him in her foul embrace, she filled him with herself and planted hunger within him. He woke with a raging desire for food and called for something to eat, but the more he ate, the more he wanted. Even as he crammed meat down his throat, he starved. He spent all his wealth on vast supplies of food which never gave him a moment's satisfaction. At last he had nothing left except his daughter. He sold her too. On the seashore where her owner's ship lay, she prayed to Poseidon to save her from slavery, and the entity heard her prayer. He changed her into a fisherman. Her master, who had been but a little behind her, saw on the long stretch of bench only the figure of a man busy with fishing lines. He called to him, "Where is that girl gone who was here a moment ago? Here are her footprints," and they suddenly stopped. The supposed fisherman answered, "I swear by the entity of the sea that no man except myself has come to the shore, and no woman either." When the other, completely bewildered, had gone off in his boat, the girl returned to her own shape. She went back to her father and delighted him by telling him what had happened. He saw an endless opportunity of making money by her. He sold her again and again. Each time Poseidon changed her, now into a mare, now into a bird, and so on. Each time she escaped from her owner and came back to her father. But at last, when the money she thus earned for him was not enough for his needs, he turned upon his own body and devoured it until he killed himself. Well, yeah, when you're tricking people, it returns on yourself somehow, but what exactly that may symbolize as something, as a particular act, or represent